Well, Steve, appreciate you taking the time today for God, Country, and the American Story. Lots to dig into here, but you've got a new book, and what I love about what you do is that you write all sorts of different books for different audiences, and this has been really fun to watch in your career over the years. But when it comes to this new one, Why Independence Day? America is Great Because God is Good, you're obviously targeting a younger generation with this, children, and you've done a number of these books now. Why this topic right now?
You know, when we planned this out, my publisher came to me shortly after Rush died and noted his great success with the Rush Revere books. And around that time, I was blessed to have the number one book in the country with Fauci and Bargain. And he said, "Hey, have you thought about going into filling this kind of a void?" And I said, first of all, no one could possibly fill Rush's void, right? To quote Larry Holmes, I mean, I couldn't carry his jock strap. Okay. So I said no. And then I got to thinking about, though, what if we did like our own version? What if we did something on America's Christian heritage for children? And I said, if you guys want to do that, we'll do it. And they said yes. And so we plotted out a trilogy of books. Why Thanksgiving was the debut in 2022. It became a national bestseller. Why Easter came out in 2024. We were always going to do Why Independence Day is the third. On purpose, I didn't do Christmas because it's just been done a million times. But what you'll find if you read all three books is the Christmas story is included in all three books because the Christmas story is part of the basis for all three of those stories. And we always planned on this being the third and final one for America's 250th, Billy, but not knowing, I know it's going to look like my inclusion of how much Old Testament Israel inspired the founding of America. It's going to look like I'm specifically responding to a certain camp that has emerged within our ranks when nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, this book was written early last year. It takes about 8 months to illustrate one of these books, especially one, frankly, that looks as good as this one does. And I'm bragging because I didn't do it. So it's not cringy. I can't take credit for I didn't do, I gave some like stick figure ideas and then they took it from there. Okay. So no, I had no idea we were going to be flirting with Chrislam and anti-Semitism and all the stuff that's going on right now on the right. I had no idea that was going to be happening when we did this. So I think that's providential. I think the timing of this, as we watch, essentially there's a Marcion chapter emerging there's a Marcion right. This idea that you can divorce our Christian heritage from its lineage of origin in Judaism and either just divorce it entirely or maybe even link it up with Islam instead. And what you're going to see when you read this book is you're going to come to the conclusion you can't. And that's why, Charlie noted so many times when he was alive that if you look at the writings of the founders, the book they quoted more than any other was actually Deuteronomy.
Okay, so you brought up about 30 topics that I want to talk about now, but I'm going to stick on the Chrislam thing because when you look at what is happening right now at this very moment, you brought up something really important. For a long time, and push back on anything if you disagree with me, but for a long time, I think a lot of people on the conservative side were really happy to just bring people in. And so it's sort of like, okay, we're bringing all these people in and they have conservative values and they agree with us on politics, let's say. But then you have this other factors, not a lot of them, or some of them rather, aren't Christians or they don't really believe in Christian ideals. And that was okay for a long time because there was a united front around the politics, right? And the conservative values. But now you have this breaking point where push has sort of come to shove and society is requiring that people stand up and embrace biblical values. And a lot of those people are breaking off and saying, no, we don't like Israel. No, we don't really care about Israel. We, in fact, are going to be anti-Semitic openly. And so you have this breaking point going on. And then you bring up the Chrislam thing. What is going on there? When you say Chrislam, what do you mean? I know what you mean, but I want to make sure people understand it. And what is the biggest danger of it?
So I would not take voices like Fuentes, Candace, and Tucker and put them all together. There's a nuance there. All right. I think Candace, she's over as you and I are recording this. She's on vacation in Russia, as one does. Right. So she, I think is just a garden variety grifter. I think Candace will just take any position, any topic. I think just a few things that I think she deeply cares about. Tormenting Charlie's widow would be one. but I think everything else is just a financial transaction for her. I think in Tucker's case, I know him way better than any of the rest of them. Tucker truly believes, I know, because he's communicated this to me. He truly believes that Bibi Netanyahu is a uniquely evil ruler in the world. He truly believes that the Israeli government is among maybe the most evil government in the world. And and you and he's taking it to the next step by the amount of essentially just propaganda tours he does throughout the Muslim world. He said in a mostly empty auditorium in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a few months ago, talking about how he's sitting here in the seat of Islam and he's very comfortable as a Christian. I would assume Tucker went out and had it since he was sitting there as a Christian and he felt comfortable. Billy, I'm assuming Tucker went out there and visited all the Christian churches in Saudi Arabia. Oh wait, he can't. There's not a single public Christian church in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the reasons why the arena was empty, because there were no Christians to come and hear him speak. They're not allowed above ground. He talked about how there's more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel. Here's the fact: there's several hundred thousand Christians in Qatar. All but about 200 of them, slightly less than 200 of them, are not citizens. They're basically indentured servants, migrants from other countries that are allowed some form of a worker visa there, but they have no civil rights. They're not citizens at all. There's actually more Muslims serving in the Israeli Defense Force than there are Christian citizens in Qatar, and there's about 180,000 Christian citizens in the nation of Israel. Right? This is just this is Arab Street Islamic propaganda that Tucker is spewing. If you do an analysis of his show, and I'm one of those guys that's just so stubborn, I do things like this. It's been about 3 years since Tucker has said anything critical of Islamic radicalization and Islamic extremism, either on his show or any of his social media accounts. 3 years. And of course, Billy, that's because this has gone very silent. These folks have modernized, and we don't have a problem with Islamic radicalism and extremism in the world anymore. No, that's not the case. No. So how would someone go 3 years without commenting on it whatsoever? Right. And I think that in the case of Tucker is a serious thinker. He's not a grifter. I don't believe he's being bought off. He was making 40 million a year at Fox. He is selling a crap ton of nicotine pouches as we speak. This is truly missional to him. If you know Tucker at all, and I do, he really believes that the path forward is to decouple Christianity from Judaism and to recouple it with Islam. And that's why now the book of Esther is really a story about Persian genocide and not the preservation of the messianic line, and so on and so forth. So you can't put each of these figures in the same box, but they all ultimately have the same effect, which is a demoralization op and an attempt to essentially disrupt and alter the long-standing trajectory of Western civilization. And to do it at this point in time is dangerous because, Billy, there's not much of it left, frankly.
There's a lot there. And I think when you look at where we're headed, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the most important thing, let me just pull back before I even ask the political question. Spiritually, when you look at this, because we're talking about very specific things, you just detailed different individuals, what they believe, what's guiding them, your perspective on that. How much of this do you believe, though, is actually spiritual? How much of this do you actually believe is from the battle between good and evil that we see in Ephesians 6?
I absolutely believe Tucker is demonically deceived 10,000%. I think Candace probably is to some degree as well. And then ultimately, the bait that's put in front of you is what motivates you. Tucker is an ideologue. He's been a serious thinker, one of the best serious thinkers of our times, right? So he's not. You weren't going to get him with womanizing. He's got a great marriage, lives a great life, goes back and forth half the year between Florida and Maine, right? So you weren't going to get him with some of the craven things. What Tucker wants is significance. Tucker wants. And I get it because I'm motivated the same way. I want to know that I'm having a missional impact with my belief system, with my faith. And so does Tucker. And so he really believes Candace is just on a grift tour. Tucker is talking to serious heads of states and organizations. He believes that he has the influence by which he was getting audiences in the White House and the Oval Office as recently as just a few months ago. He really believes he has the influence to change the trajectory of Western civilization and U.S. Israeli and U.S. Islamist relations that goes back from the founding of the country. Remember, the first war this country ever fought was against Muslims, the Barbary Coast Pirates. That's what the line in the Battle Hymn of the Republic is about, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, right? And so I think we get motivated and tempted by that which tempts us, which James say you're not tempted by anything except that which actually tempts you, right? So, I'm not tempted to become an alcoholic. So I have no problem just going into have a sports bar, and I'm not much of a drinker, order a burger and a Coke Zero and sit there with a friend of mine who has a beer. Someone else who's very tempted by being an alcoholic should not go to a place like that, right? And so I think that in the case of Candace, I think she just wants acclaim and wealth, the things of this world. I think Tucker truly believes that he is operating on a missional level, and that's why I think you see way more commitment from him, and that's also why I think, frankly, he's more dangerous.
Yeah, so when you talk about the spiritual aspects of this, you have so many young people right now who are sort of coming into their own. They're in their late 20s, they're in their 30s, let's say. Their lives are really kicking off, and a lot of them, these are people in the pews at church, they're people who love the Lord, and yet they're very confused about Israel, the role of Israel, and these talking heads and others are pouring into them with information that is actually only further separating them from an understanding. And by the way, I would say churches have done a bad job, many of them, of really preaching the Old Testament and helping people understand it, because that's how you end up in this position. It's not just because certain talking heads are saying things. There was already a baseline of misunderstanding or a lack of understanding that was there, and churches are responsible for that. But how do we reverse course on this and help these young people, especially, really understand what's actually happening here spiritually?
That's an excellent question. And I mean, there was always going to be a cost, Billy, of taking a generation off corporately for discipleship. And for every, I think of my buddy Jack Hibbs, I call him America's pastor. For every pastor like that, unfortunately, there's been way too many in this last generation that were more interested in building a brand than the kingdom. And, we kind of went from Jerry Falwell Sr. and D. James Kennedy and Billy Graham and Francis Schaeffer. We went from that to Joel Osteen and Bill Hybels and Rick Warren. It's a tad of a downgrade. All right. And so the price to pay, as the prophet Hosea said, is my people perish for a lack of knowledge. There's not the residual worldview to push back against things that are so easily debunked. One of the reasons why, and I've tried, that Tucker will not put me on his show or come on mine is because he knows I will hand him his hat and make him eat it from a worldview standpoint. He knows the things that he attempts with his audience of people who are biblically ignorant that he gets away with, he would not get away with somebody like me. That's why he picks his audiences and the shows that he'll do at the exact same time. So let's discuss these questions and how to answer them. First of all, there has been a great argument within Christianity for 2,000 years what the ascendancy of the Church of Jesus Christ means for the nation of Israel. Keep in mind, for most of New Testament history, there was no nation called Israel. So there's always been a great debate. The term dispensationalism has become so bastardized. It's entropy now. Essentially, it just means if you're not an anti-Semite, you're a dispensation. I've probably done as many programs questioning dispensationalism and platforming alternative eschatological theories like amillennialism, which is what Catholics believe and much of the church believed in, before the Reformation. Postmillennialism, which is what a lot of the reformers believed, what the Puritans believed. And that language is right there in the Mayflower Compact. I mean, we're here for the advancement of the Christian religion, the idea that the church triumphs in history and then that fulfills her mission, and that's when Christ returns. I've done as many shows platforming alternative views on this and questioning the premillennial rapture view as probably anybody with any evangelical with a significant platform in America has for the last 15 years. All right, but it's one thing to do it for intellectual query and for fascination. It's another thing for deconstruction. And this term dispensationalism has become so bastardized now that someone like Charles Spurgeon, who was preaching in England during where dispensationalism came from, right at the time it was originally ascendant as a theological position. He despised dispensationalism. He thought it was borderline heretical. And yet, Charles Spurgeon also thought that Romans 9 through 11 could mean that one day in the future would require a recongregated nation of Israel in order to fulfill what Paul says there in those chapters in Romans about what ultimately will become of the Jewish people in a New Testament era. Jonathan Edwards, all right, there may never have been in America without Jonathan Edwards. Maybe the most, if it ever, I know there's a great movie out this year about George Whitefield, and he deserves some acclaim. But Jonathan Edwards was really the heart and soul heart and soul preacher of colonial America.
Mm.
Jonathan Edwards entertained a lot of the post-reformational kind of anti-Semitic tropes that Martin Luther got into late in his life. Jonathan Edwards thought that if for Romans 9 through 11 to be fulfilled eventually, there'd have to be a reconstituted nation of Israel, perhaps, for that kind of a harvest of souls to take place because the Jewish people were so scattered. In other words, these views are way more nuanced, way more debated than what is being sold online. But our young men in particular are falling for this for two reasons. Number one, you're right. The church did not, much of what I just said, the names I probably mentioned, well, maybe not to your audience. All right. But in the average evangelical church, they have no, I'm Charlie Brown's teacher. What's a Spurgeon? What's an Edwards? Okay. I don't know. I couldn't spell dispensational. What millennialism? What is this? That's a problem. And so our people are ripe for the pickings. Our people know 5 steps to being a nicer person, but they have no real theological basis or depth at all. And so they're ripe for the pickings of this of this sort of resurrected, version of Marcion. They don't even know who I'm referring to with Marcion, by the way. The other factor is Gen Xers like you and me, or you're right there between millennial and Gen Xer. So I'm in the heart of Gen Xers, but Gen Xers and millennials, we were the two generations asked to go and die for essentially nothing in the Middle East. And, our younger brothers and our sons now know that history. And they're like, so let me get this straight. I can't find a non-blue haired 6 nose ringed girl who hasn't had 3 abortions yet or doesn't want to. The average age of a median home buyer, first-time home buyer in America is 42 years old.
That's my age. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
20 years ago it was 28. 20 years ago it was 28. All right, so I can't find a wife, I can't get a home. You're going to give my job to a foreigner. But the deal is, though, I get to go die in the Middle East on a sandlot for nothing. And the assumption is that the existence of Israel is provoking all of this. When the reality is, before we even get in any prophetic arguments at all, and whether Genesis 12:3 still applies today or not, just look at history. For 1,400 years, we had Islam without a nation called Israel on the earth, right? So there's no nation called Israel that we're standing with to provoke the Islamic world, to prompt them to hate us, okay? And so, and most of this era during the history of our country, by the way, we were deeply isolationist as a nation in the 18th and 19th century from a foreign policy standpoint, right? So then how did Islam treat America? How did it treat Western civilization in the centuries before there was America? Did it say, you know what, you Westerners, you guys are great. You guys are on your own. You're not meddling in the Middle East at all. You're letting us take the Holy Land. We're great. Is that what happened? Is that the history? No. In the book of Revelation, there are letters to 7 churches in a place called Asia Minor. What country is that? Turkey. Where did those churches go? Was there a campaign and the Muslim party had their candidate and the Christian party had theirs, and by referendum the people of all those churches just voted for Islam? No, they were conquered. Where did the Christian enclaves, the original Christian the first place we're called Christians is in a place called Antioch, in the heart of a country called Syria. Where did this large pocket of Christians in Syria go? Paul is converted on the road to Damascus, on the road to Syria, on the road to confront these Christians in Antioch. Where did the Christians in Damascus go? Where did the Assyrian Christians, one of the oldest sects of Christianity, Iraqi Christians, where'd they all go? Another one of the oldest ones, the Coptic Christians in Egypt, where did they all go? Lebanon was a majority Christian country until the Ottoman Empire. Where did all the Christians go? Where'd they go? Islam took them. That's what happened.
So
That's the history.
the argument that it's all Israel's fault, right, is it
Yeah.
falls flat because of that history. And I
Yep.
think going back to what you were saying before, we don't have time to get into this now, but I do think it's fascinating because I think there are biblical arguments that could be made on Israel too. You go to Ezekiel 37 to 39, 36 to 39 even, and you're looking at those. I think there's some prophetic things there. Not everybody would agree with that, but I think there is when it comes to 1948 and the regathering. But pushing all that aside, the history you just detailed is fascinating because it's a history that does not involve Israel whatsoever at all. And yet you still have the same end result of what you just described. And so there's so much here, but I want to just before we go, I want to bring this back to the book because, and we're going to have you back to talk more about all of this. Obviously, the book again, it's Why Independence Day America is Great Because God is Good. This is a book that I love. I love this sort of thing because you have something for kids to learn, and then you have something for parents and grandparents to enjoy as they're helping their kids learn. In light of everything we just talked about, which are very heavy and big topics, what is your big hope for the takeaway that people have for Why Independence Day?
That this country and its origin was forged by imperfect people through the providential hand of a perfect God. The humans that Moses took across the Red Sea, that God gave the 10 commandments to through Moses. The humans the times in which Messiah was born into. Even our founding fathers, they weren't better human beings than us. They were sinners, every last one of them in need of salvation as well. And so therefore, if God could work through them, all right, to weave a 3,000-year-old tale that led to the miraculous birth of this nation, then that means he can work through us to have a rebirth of this nation as well. That it's not about our character, but it's about the character of our God. And therefore, our devotion to him is what will then make us and give us the character of the kind of people that will not be the generation that Reagan warned about, that we'd wake up one day and have to tell our children and grandchildren about what it was once like in America when men were free.
Steve, as always, appreciate having you on. Thanks for joining me today.